We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This is what we have called our first principle, since it was adopted by democratic votes of congregational delegates at the UUA's General Assemblies in 1984 and 1985. It's one of two principles that most UUs can remember without having to look them up. The first principle's inherent worth and dignity, and the seventh's interdependent web of all existence. There's also a version of the first principle for children, which uses grade school language to say that each and every person is important. And one of the 7 promises developed here at the UUFP many years ago expresses an intention to put the first principle into practice by listening actively and speaking and acting respectfully to others. Now, I remember in my early days as a UU coming to the conclusion that there's little in the 7 principles to which most reasonable people, whether they're UUs or not, would object. Take the first principle. Most people do treat one another reasonably because that's how they expect other people to treat them. That's the golden rule, though it's more than that. When we know that someone has inherent worth and dignity, we treat them with respect, not in expectation, but because it's the right thing to do. In almost every conversation about the first principle, though, sooner or later someone asks, does it really apply to everyone? Even someone like Hitler? How do we reconcile such a person's unspeakably horrible behavior with the idea that even they have inherent worth and dignity? However, we don't need to go to such an extreme case to wonder what to do with our first principle. Consider that, as has happened in many congregations and other gatherings of UUs and people in general over the years, someone acts out for whatever reason. And this isn't an isolated event. They act out repeatedly. They don't hurt anyone physically. That would be straightforward to assess and address, but their actions still cause emotional or even psychological harm. And yet their friends come to their defense, using the first principle as a shield to protect them from the consequences of their actions. Or imagine that even though we're all wonderfully lovely people, one of us simply has a bad day. I know it's hard to imagine such a thing ever happening to one of us, and it's not like there are many reasons why any of us might ever be cranky, outside of being tired or hungry or sick or upset or thirsty or worried or frustrated or too cold or too warm or having indigestion, or the traffic was bad, or our mail got lost, or the dog needs to go to the vet, or the boss wouldn't stop bothering us, or we just saw a politician lie on television, or we got one too many calls about our car's extended warranty. Yes, there's practically no reason why any of us would ever be anything other than perfectly behaved and reasonable, is there? But once we've calmed down and maybe had a snack, then we realize that we were unkind or even mean. So what does that say about our own inherent worth and dignity? So I put it to you that the first principle, our commitment as a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, our first principle is a wonderful gift. It allows us to understand that who we are and how we behave are not the same thing. There is the person who has inherent worth and dignity, and there is the person's behavior, which could be good or bad, intentionally or unintentionally. All of us make mistakes. We're human, after all, And there is always room for improvement. It doesn't mean that we are bad people. Who we are and how we behave are not the same thing. Last summer's report, Unlocking the Power of Covenant, from the UUA's Commission on Appraisal puts it this way. Part of the power of covenant is the guidance it provides in distinguishing between behavior and individual worth. When we are all assumed to be of equal worth, it becomes possible to address behavior that appears to be out of covenant without attacking or compromising any individual's worth. I think those are the two most liberating sentences I have ever read. So let me read them to you again. Part of the power of covenant is the guidance it provides in distinguishing between behavior and individual worth. When we are all assumed to be of equal worth, it becomes possible to address behavior that appears to be out of covenant without attacking or compromising any individual's worth. Now, in my experience, there are two ways we can respond when something we did or said is called into question. First, we can become defensive, by which I mean we respond with resentment, anger, shame, bold-faced denial, deflecting onto someone else, disputing the validity of the question, attacking the person who questioned us, making it about something other than what we actually did or said, and so on. In other words, taking it personally. Or second, we can consider the question, take the opportunity to correct or clarify, try to understand how what we did or said was received, learn from another perspective, acknowledge any shortcomings, make amends as needed, and otherwise accept the consequences of our actions. The main difference between the two responses, I put it to you, is that in the second case, we truly embrace our own inherent worth and dignity. In the first case, our defensiveness comes from thinking that who we are and how we behave are the same thing. So any criticism of what we've done or said is the same as the criticism of us as a person. So of course we take it personally and get defensive. But in the second case, we understand that our behavior is inevitably subject to misunderstandings, ignorance, poor judgment, and just plain crankiness. And it's okay for our behavior to be questioned. And moreover, we are responsible for the consequences of our own actions, because that doesn't change the fact that we have inherent worth and dignity. Most of us would agree that our first principle calls us to treat one another with kindness and respect. And it's more than the golden rule. Really, it's a modern expression of universalism, that everyone is worthy, and so everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. This is important for us as a society making our way through this phase of the pandemic, hopefully emerging out of the pandemic, and it's particularly important for us as a congregation. The last 2 years have changed so much in our lives as individuals and as a religious community. And while it's going to take time for some things to return to normal, other things will never go back to the way they were before. We need to relearn some things, like how to be in a room full of people again, while other things we'll be learning for the first time. In other words, we'll almost certainly feel some stress from needing to figure out so much, and our relationships will likely be strained as we all make adjustments, large and small. Add to that the inevitable misunderstandings, ignorance, poor judgment, and just plain crankiness that mean we don't always bring our best selves, and add to that what we as this congregation will be doing to find, buy, renovate, and move into a new church property. And it all adds up to living the first principle, not just as a nice idea, but as an absolutely essential fact of our life together. Now, if you're feeling a bit anxious about what I just said, that's understandable. But let me say that I do not doubt for 1 second that we will get through this with flying colors. The last 2 years have proved that we are resilient and adaptable, meeting challenges with equal parts courage and flexibility, and always facing the future with resolve, realism, and active hope. But that's what I'm talking about next Sunday. For today, I want to come back to the fact that embracing the fullness of the gift that is our first principle means that we are called not only to treat one another with kindness and respect, but also to take to heart our own inherent worth and dignity too. There are a couple of reasons for this. For one thing, it's a necessary part of being in covenant with one another. As I said earlier, the UUA's Commission on Appraisal noted that when we know our own inherent worth and dignity, then it becomes possible to talk about our behavior in constructive ways that deepen our relationships. If I say or do something out of misunderstanding, ignorance, poor judgment, or just plain crankiness, then you can tell me. And remembering my own inherent worth and dignity helps me to avoid defensiveness so that we can talk about what happened as reasonable people and figure out together what to do about it. In other words, the first principle is essential to the practice of covenant, not only in terms of treating other people with kindness and respect, but also so that we can speak openly, honestly, and frankly about any difficulties we might encounter. Another reason I'm talking about this is that a lot has happened in recent years to erode our sense of our own inherent worth and dignity. We've had 2 years of a pandemic in which 1 million Americans have died, and many of those deaths should have been avoidable. We've seen selfish, unkind behavior from way too many people, whether it's over the simple act of wearing a mask to protect other people, or the deliberately concocted outrage over the teaching in schools of something that isn't actually taught in schools. We've seen overt acts of racism, from the police and others killing people of color and attacking protesters, to the violent attempts by neo-Nazis and white nationalists to overthrow the government. Oh, and we had 4 years of a horrible presidency that was more about greed and the fragile ego of the former president than anything good for the country, with daily and sometimes multiple times a day assaults on everything we value as UUs. We have been through so much. The human mind is good at forgetting, putting the hard things aside so that we don't have to deal with them. But the human body doesn't forget. All of us have been collectively traumatized over the last 5 years, and we can't pretend that we haven't. Mostly we think of trauma in terms of a mortal threat, such as violence or an accident that is life-threatening and can result in something like post-traumatic stress disorder. But trauma can also be a moral threat, when our sensibilities are offended and our beliefs in what is right and what is wrong are violated. And when that goes on for long enough, then the resulting moral injury causes us to question not the safety of the world around us, as in PTSD, but our own value and meaning. and yes, our own inherent worth and dignity as human beings. I experienced this myself most acutely last year when I went to a public meeting of the Newport News School Board. A number of you were there too, supporting the board's adoption of state-mandated measures to protect transgender students. But there were also a lot of people there opposed to those measures. Perhaps it would have helped if they had yelled and ranted and frothed at the mouth, but instead they very calmly talked about pedophiles, and they twisted religion and spread lies and denied the humanity of children. When I left to head home, I thought I was going to throw up. I wasn't just upset. I had a physical reaction to the displays of blatant intolerance and transphobia that I had witnessed. We have some healing to do. Healing from the moral trauma that we have all experienced during the last 5 years. We all need to remember and reclaim our own inherent worth and dignity, not as an intellectual proposition, but in our bodies. We need to embrace the first principle, not only as a guide in our ethical living, but by truly embodying it as well. So I'm going to ask you before we end to take a couple of minutes with me to start this healing. I invite you to find a comfortable position, relaxed and still, but not rigid, and with your eyes closed, if you would, and breathe. Breathe in and breathe out. Move the focus of your awareness around your body to check in with each part of yourself in turn. Where is there discomfort? Where is there pain? Where are you holding stress? In your scalp? In your jaw? In your neck? In your shoulders? In your arms? Or your hands? In your chest? In your abdomen? In your back? In your legs? Or your feet? As you check in with each part of your body, simply take note of what it is telling you. Acknowledge what you feel there and honor it. Breathe in and breathe out. Now visit each part of your body again, and this time say to it, "You matter." Tell your scalp, "You matter." Tell your jaw, "You matter." Tell your neck, "You matter." Tell your shoulders, "You matter." Tell your arms and your hands, "You matter." Tell your chest, "You matter." Tell your abdomen, "You matter." Tell your back, "You matter." Tell your legs and your feet, "You matter." Breathe in and breathe out. Imagine every part of your body, whether strong or weak, whether painful or powerful. Imagine your body filling with the conviction, you matter. All of you matters. There is no one like you, and there never will be again. How does this conviction feel? How does it feel not merely to believe, but to trust in your own inherent worth and dignity? Breathe in and breathe out. Feel that conviction, that trust filling every part of you. Feel it in your skin. Feel it in your bones. Feel it flowing with your blood. Feel it with every breath in and out. Feel it telling you, reminding you that you matter, that you're good just as you are, that you deserve exquisite care. Breathe in and breathe out. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Our first principle isn't just about how we treat other people. It's also about how we understand ourselves. It reminds us that we matter, that we're good just as we are, and that we deserve exquisite care. May we truly take this to heart and let the healing begin.